Can a whisper shave the night thinner than a blade? Can a silence, kept under the ribs for years, learn the patience of a whetstone, and wait until even the moon's breath sounds loud? And can a small piece of steel, no longer a gentleman's mourning habit, but the shape of a verdict, slip between the seams of a winterless Florida dusk, and part not only hair, but history? Some say vengeance thunders, others swear it burns. But what if it does neither? What if it hums like a bee behind a wall, a barely visible sound that travels through wood and time until the whole house vibrates with something it cannot name? In 1821, in the court quarters along the Black River water, the answer learned to glint. Before we step further, before the lamp goes low, before the floorboard remembers how it once groaned under the weight of barefoot decisions. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. Now let the wick burn smaller. Now let the rooms grow larger with shadow. Now let the razor look up from its sleep. Florida had no winter for mercy, only a long breath of heat that pressed its palm against mouth and mind. The quarters rose in a row like teeth worn down by years of grinding. Cypress knees stood in the low places like knuckles poking up from a shallow grave, and the river slid by with a face so calm it seemed to remember no name. Every morning the bell spoke the same grammar, and bodies bent into the syntax of another man's wealth. The main house wore white like a lie. Under its galleries, the air stagnated like a thought no one dared finish. The cotton fields bled the sky of its blue. Midday would become a plate of white light that made everything else, trees, faces, tools, seem like silhouettes cut from grief. The gin rattled like something with fever, and the lint swirled around it like the lost skin of days. Overseer Boone had a way of spitting that marked the dirt the way a map maker marks borders. A man knew the shape of his life by where Boone's eyes fell. He had teeth like a lock that had forgotten how to open. It was the year when Spain let go and America took hold, but papers changed hands more gently than people did. Flags traded colours, but chains never learned languages beyond weight. In the days when summer never died, a thin wind sometimes threaded the evening as if trying to sew shut what daytime opened. Chickens fussed in their own nervous language. Hogs muttered deep in their sleep. Children learned when to play and when to mimic. Every night the quarters exhaled at last, and the cypresses drank the sound. A house is a breathing thing. A plantation is a lung. The master's table inhaled, the quarters exhaled. In between stood the barns with their secret heat, the smokehouse with its hanging sentences, the kitchen with its sharp, bright talk where knives learned the day's gossip and pots remembered the taste of salt. The well glinted with stars no one could. In the corner cabin, near the tree struck by lightning the summer before, its wound still black and glossy as if the sky had licked it, lived Asa. Some said he was born on the riverboat that brought him from Georgia's wanting. Others said he was found at the edge of a ditch with a fever that burned his name down to 3 letters only. Anna A. He moved through the world quietly, a man who kept his breath on a short. If he laughed, it was behind his teeth. If he listened, it was with his eyes. He fixed things for the quarters, a chair leg, a barrel hoop, a stovepipe that coughed too much. He had the manner of a locksmith, always touching what held something else shut. The cotton season did not end, it merely learnt new disguises. Planting turned to tending, turned to picking, turned to ginning, turned back to mending hands, so they could pick again. Time was a ring, Sundays were a rumour, a creek for washing, a borrowed hour for singing, the old woman's suani mixing ash with water and memory to ease the raw thumbs. The men counted weather in the grumble of frogs, the women counted weather in their backs. No frost to etch the window panes here. Instead, the heat wrote its scripture in sweat and would not be corrected. In the afternoons, Spanish moss hung like grey sentences waiting for an object. The whip was a grammar too, and the fields learned it at At dusk, fireflies put on a shy court, marrying and divorcing light in less than a blink. The quarters told stories in the blue hour, of rivers that open like doors, if spoken to, right, of owls who carry names to the other side of the swamp, of razors and bees, and how sometimes a small bright thing can do more than a... And always the main house, curtains clean as bleached bones, stood watching itself in the cool bowl of the well. House and water, face and face. Somewhere on its dressing table lay a gentleman's razor, nickel-bright, pearl-handled, kept for mornings when the master tried to coax order from his own reflection. Steel that kissed soap and skin, never guessing it might learn another prayer. I learned early that a man is a book with many hands writing in it. My back learned one handwriting, my heart learned another. In the quarters, every scar is a line of script. Some are capital letters, some are underlined twice. My mother kept our days with a string of knots, 1 knot for each time Boone weighed her basket with his eyes, 2 knots for each time he weighed it with his rope. When she died in a cotton fog that took her breath like a creditor takes a chair, I took the string and tied it around my wrist until my skin learned its shape. That was the summer the lightning opened the tree and showed the inside of wood, the pale light that lives there. And I understood that even a tree has a secret. At its heart something bright is always waiting. I kept my secret too. I let it wait. A ledger is not only numbers, it is the stubborn memory of subtraction. The master kept his book columns neat, entry tidy. Rice and pork and calico and whiskey and nails, the price of an overseer's patience. I kept mine without paper. The day my sister Eliza's laughter broke like a plate when Boone's shadow fell across her path. The morning I watched the river carry away the small raft I'd built for my brother's dream of leaving, saw it snag on a cypress knee and tip like a prayer that forgot its words. The night I pressed my ear to the wall of the main house and heard the master say, "He's quiet. Quiet men scare the daylight," and everyone laughed. Each entry added its ounce to the scale, and the scale became a mouth that wanted to speak. I learned the kitchen by its sounds, the nice thin church bell against bone, the kettle's breath, the spoon's moon-bright scrape. Metal learns a person faster than people do. I scrubbed the master's shaving bowl, porcelain blue, with little painted birds that looked like the sky had a private joke. I rinsed his brush, I watched the small hairs hold lather like snowfall in a winter I could only imagine. The razor lay in its brown leather sleeve, asleep and dreaming of throats that smelled of cologne. When I held it to dry it, the blade kept a line of light along itself, like a river you can fold and put back inside a pocket. I studied steel the way a preacher studies silence. A blade is honest. It has only one sermon and says it clean. I watched the master draw it down his cheek, a slow harvest of stubble, and I saw the ease of the gesture. A man who thinks morning belongs to him. I learned the hinges whisper, the weight of the handle, the nerve in the wrist that keeps courage from trembling. I learned the angle you need when you want steel to sing but not scream. Boone taught me other angles, how to bend so your breath stays yours. He could spot a thought from 50 paces and whip it out of you. Sometimes I think he beat an idea before it ever dared grow into a plan. He liked to whistle through a tooth gap. The tune had no melody, just a narrow complaint. He smelled of tobacco spit and brag. His boots had 2 kinds of mud, one from the field, one from the cabin thresholds he stepped on without asking. He believed in punishment like some men believe in rain, a thing that falls whether you do right or not. My ledger grew fat, not with rage that flares and dies, but with a patience that learns to walk like a shadow. Patience is not softness, it is a blade that refuses to rush. I let the days sand me down to my true grain. When I lay at night, I could feel the tree's lighting burn across my face in the dark. See it with my fingers, the way the strike had carved a black river down the trunk. I put my palm to that wound many nights, The wood never spoke, but it remembered heat. I decided to remember too. Swan Ithere, the old woman whose hair kept the colour of storm water, told me a thing. Steel don't care who holds it, only cares which hand has the steadier sorrow. I carried that sentence in my mouth like a coin. I kept my laughter small and my answers shorter. I gave Boone the quiet he feared, and the master the yes he expected. At the pump I practiced control, set the handle rocking in the exact measure to make water flow with no splash. At the gin I practiced tension, I watched 1,000 small fibres learn order. At the washpot I practiced heat. And when the master's razor came to my hand on a certain Wednesday, because the houseboy Jacob had the fever and I, Asa, could mind a thing without making a mess, I felt the ledger turn a page by itself. Rituals were simply patience given shape. I began with water, because water teaches everything slowly. At the well I lifted the bucket and watched how the rope learned weight, how the wheel spoke to the axle, how a small groan foretells a larger failure weeks ahead. I learned to hear future in wood. At night I oiled the hinges on my cabin door until it opened like a breath instead of a word. I practiced crossing my own floor as if it were the back of a sleeping animal. I asked no favours. I made myself smaller where bigness was noticed and larger where smallness could get you stepped on. I repaired the door on the smokehouse so the latch held true. I mended the strap on a saddle and put the awl back upright as you would a candle snarched too soon. I kept a piece of glass for a mirror, not to admire but to map nerves, how the eye learns to hold still while the hand moves, how the jaw loosens so the wrist can be firm. In the kitchen I fell in love with sounds only a blade makes, linen torn straight, a sound like a soft sip through teeth, meat cut cross-grain, a sigh. I asked to sharpen the cook's knives and she let me, because a man who minds edges is useful. She gave me the whetstone and I promised it nothing except time. I drew steel against it, water-dark strokes that left a whisper in the air. In that whisper lived decisions, how quickly to draw, how evenly to lean, how a wrist is a metronome for judgment. The master's shaving hour was a catechism, basin, brush, lather, blade, towel, cologne, compliment to his own reflection. I learned the liturgy, I saw how the bowl warmed his vanity, how the mirror gave him back a face he trusted. I saw how men become smaller when they are alone with their habits. A room with a mirror is a chapel where the only God is the self. I meant to walk into that church with my own sacrament, but steel is only half the ritual. The other half is the room. So I learned that too. The dressing room wore a faint smell of cedar and starch, with an undernote of spoiled sweetness from a cologne that did not suit our air. 2 narrow windows faced the river, the curtains light enough for a moon to pass through. The floorboard under the second window remembered rain and squeaked softly when the weather swelled. A man's shoes, set side by side, tell you his haste. The master placed his neatly, toes even. Boone's boots flung themselves like 2 insults. I took a rag and the master's permission and polished the mirror until it held the world tight. I cleaned the razor's leather sleeve with tallow, working the oil with a finger a slow prayer. I sharpened the blade under Jacob's eye when he felt half well, so no one could say I'd kept it longer than needed. I asked the cook for lard to shine the strap of the razor. She frowned, then forgot. At the river I practiced stillness with the snakes. They know how to be a line until they become a sentence, and by then it is always too late for the one who reads them. I let my breath fall into the water and watched the ripples tell on me. I waited until they smoothed, until the river forgot I existed. Then I lifted my hand, I counted the seconds between the lift and the river's answer. The count grew short, and the river and I learned each other's grammar. I was not alone. The quarters see with more eyes than they show. Old Suwani watched the way my shoulders learned a new square. She said nothing. Eliza hummed a low song that kept coming back to the same 2 notes. That is how you sing when you are balancing a cup of grief on your head and cannot spill. The men playing bones out back made space where my shadow fell. Children paused, then resumed. A plan unspoken is still a drum. It changes the walk of those who hear it. I chose a night when the river was fat from 2 days' rain and carried moonlight the way a blade carries light, a thin silver the eye half believes. The master drank more on such nights. Boone bragged louder when thunder had recently signed its name. The house relaxed as if the humidity had melted its sternness. The quarters grew cautious. Storms loosened the nails in a man's restraint. I wrapped the razor in a white cloth as if it were something tender. I put it under my shirt at the waist, the way a man hides a kindness he means to give. But steel has a temperature of its own, and it taught my skin its chill. A blade is a teacher. It asks only, are you ready to answer with your hand when your mouth is not allowed to speak? The house was an animal asleep with one ear open. I stepped through its breath. The clock in the hall ticked like a far-off pick, harvesting seconds. I did not count them. I let them fall past me like a creek running somewhere I could not control. Boone lay on the back gallery chair, mouth open to catch his own noise. The rain had slowed to a memory. Only the trees remembered how to move. The dressing room was half dark, moonlight and lamp in a truce. The mirror held both, the kind of light that makes you honest and the kind that lets you lie. The razor lay on the table, leather sleeve open like a small book whose last page you already know. I took it as a man takes communion, not hungry but called. A sound at the door. The master entered, shirt open, jaw blue with sleep and drink, eyes at that soft level where pride has loosened its tie. He saw me and did not see me. I was the habit that prepared his morning, now in his night by simple mistake. He waved the air. Be quick, he said to the room. His face in the mirror made small corrections to itself, as if he could shave away what the day had added. Isu, I said. The word left my mouth and fell at my feet. He sat. I warmed the basin with water I had carried up. I filled the brush with lather and painted his jaw in white. Winter he would never otherwise know. The bubbles trembled with the beat of his blood. He closed his eyes, trusting the ritual. The room smelled of soap, old cedar, and the faint river that always finds a way into a Florida night. The razor in my hand knew me. The whetstone's lessons rose in my wrist. Eliza's two-note song found the bones of my fingers. Swanee's sentence, which hand has the steadier sorrow, sat on my shoulder like a bird that would not fly. In the mirror, I saw us both, a man in a chair with his throat to the world, and behind him a shape that had learned how to become the air. The blade's line held the moon. Steel touches foam the way rain touches ash, making it something else. I say smooth, he murmured, eyes still closed. I mean smooth. His mouth smiled, the kind that believes itself clever for waking early. Yes, Sue, I said again to the room that was already forgetting the word. I began as always, ear to jaw, a careful harvest, so the skin would not wonder. The first pass took only the day's small stubble, the way a tide takes sand. The second pass learnt his pulse. My hand did not hurry. It remembered the pump handle, the gin's rhythm, the quiet that makes a river show its map. I turned his chin with a towel as if it were a precious thing. The blade found its angle, that clean arithmetic of pressure and mercy. Then silence asked its question, not the silence of fear or waiting, but the thick, sacred one that lives before a name is spoken. In that bowl of quiet, the ledger opened to its last page and wrote by itself. I placed the steel where prayer begins, just beneath the jaw's soft door where a man hides his secret. The master's breath made a small sail of my towel. His eyelashes twitched as dreams argued and lost. In the mirror, the moon drew a thin white road across the blade. I did not make thunder, I made a line. The steel read him. It learned every vowel of his skin. It taught the room a brief new grammar no one else heard. The S of the draw, the halted H of breath, the smallest possible sound a throat can make when it suddenly knows history is not a thing that only marches, it can also turn. He opened his eyes to the mirror, saw a man behind him whose quiet had grown its own light. Our gazes met in the glass, two small lamps in a private storm. In that moment I felt no heat, only the neatness of an answer long practiced. He reached for the towel, then paused, as if his hand had remembered something the rest of him had never learned, that some mornings do not belong to the man in the chair. He brought a hand up. I moved the blade a final inch, the inch that separates habit from history. Silence broke without sound. Vengeance spoke in the voice of a razor, so soft the ear doubts, so sharp the world agrees. He did not fall. He sat very still, as if remembering being a boy taught how to hold a book straight. Then he folded forward slow, like a prayer that has decided to kneel. The towel caught what it could of the night that followed. The lamp flickered and made angels of the dust. Outside, the river gave a single low consonant, the kind of sound water makes when it carries both moonlight and news. I set the blade down in its leather sleeve and closed it, like a letter I had finished writing to someone who would never read. Boone stirred on the gallery, his boots complaining to one another. The house listened to him the way a deer listens to an axe in a far wood. I wiped the bowl, lifted the basin, straightened the chair. The mirror showed a room that could almost believe nothing had happened, the way a face after a shave can believe it has been made new. I walked out the door on feet that belonged to the earth more than to me. The clock gathered itself and ticked again, relieved to find the world still taking steps. On the stairs I met the air coming up, Boone's smell coming before him. He grinned his wolf grin, saw my empty hands, and thought, as he always did, that I was carrying nothing. The morning came not as dawn but as verdict. The house woke in pieces, each room discovering a thing it did not want to know. The cry rose raw, a note that could not decide whether to ask or accuse. It tore the curtain of the day, and behind that curtain stood the quarters with their masks of stillness. Chickens flew their nervous prayers. The hogs turned in their sleep with a sound like heavy pages. The river added nothing. Boone tried to dress his rage in order, but wore it backward. He stomped the galleries until his boots printed testimony on the boards. He issued searches like a blind man points, everywhere and nowhere. The doctor came with a smell of horse and leather, and decided nothing men like him always preferred long words to short truths. A rumour galloped from the house to the road and back again until it was a different animal, foam on its mouth, wild in the eyes. Indians, Spaniards, highwaymen, escaped men from Georgia, a mulatto with French on his tongue, a jealous woman, a ghost. In the quarters we kept the arithmetic of eyes, who looked at whom and how long, who tied their head wrap tighter, who stirred the pot with a different hand. I said little, that was my language before, it remained my language now. Eliza kept singing her two notes, unbothered by melody. Swanee stirred the pot as if it was the river itself, slow circles that swallowed heat and gave it back in something more useful. The small children learned quickly, walk as if your feet are innocent, keep your questions boiled down to yes or no. The old men sharpened nothing that day, not a hoe, not a story. The women hung sheets that breathed the wind, a church full of white ghosts attending their own funeral. Boone gathered men and words until he had neither left. He preached punishment to anyone who would be his congregation. He offered the reward of fear. The sheriff came pale with importance and stood on the master's steps like a borrowed statue. He took notes with a pen that shook, perhaps from coffee, perhaps from learning the house could bleed. The newspaper man arrived, hat too bright, eyes too bright, because grief is only news if it comes to the right door. He wrote in the near shade, a dastardly deed in a genteel district he penned, a savage mischief in the cotton paradise. He used words like outrage and abomination, and vowed the county would not sleep. The county, of course, slept. Men sleep, houses after such nights do not. They questioned us in the yard under a sun that measured patience with a branding iron. I did not tremble. A man who has poured his fear away has only steadiness left. I let my hands be mended wood, my face be the tree that learned lightning and did not fall. I said, "Yes, sir," in the same tone as the day before, and the day before that, and the day before the day I was born. They tore the quarters with their eyes, then with their hands. They found nothing but lives, and lives are too many to count when a man wants only one answer. Boone's voice threw stones. The words broke like river glass and cut nothing. He took his rope and tried to snare the wind. The wind went on being wind. The legend began where facts found no purchase. Some said a spirit came loping from the cypress and trimmed the master's breath like a hedge. Some said a Spanish blade remembered old wars and took a new one in the night. Some said the razor did it by itself, bored of men's vanity, hungry for a use more serious than grooming. Children drew it in the dirt with a stick, a single line that glittered in imagination. Women folded towels with tighter corners. Men stood by the river longer than needed, their eyes rehearsing the old art of looking and not seeing. At the gin the flywheel moaned more deeply now, as if the building had lost a tooth. The cotton lint hung heavier, a slow winter in a place that did not know snow. Work went on, because grief is never stronger than the debt ledger, but something had shifted in the hinge of the days. The bell sounded less like grammar, more like a question. What next, and who will write it? Boone did not sleep for 3 nights. He prowled with a lantern that burned like a false star. He sniffed the ground as if guilt had a smell he could teach his nose. He accused the mirror of lying. He beat a stool until it broke open and gave up only wood. He told the sheriff the quarters were breeding silence, as if silence were a contagion that could be stamped out by boots. He slapped a boy for walking softly. He cursed the river for remembering how to keep its mouth. When he looked at me, he saw the same quiet. Quiet can frighten a man who believes noise is proof of control. He marked me with his stare, then moved on. A dog that suspects, a man that doubts his own sense. He did not make my name his target. Perhaps the razor, sleeping now where I had once watched it, kept its own counsel, silver tongue tucked, pearl handle blank as noon. Years are not years, they are rooms. You step from one to the next, and the air changes temperature, and you know only by the way your breath behaves that you have crossed a threshold. The year after the razor wrote its sentence, the river ran fat each spring, as if rehearsing the generosity of flood. New men came to wear old titles. The main house replaced its mirror, and bouqueted a wall as if paint could instruct memory to obey. It could not. The quarters kept their practice of evenings, chairs that remember backs, fireflies that float like unsealed letters, children whose hands learn the difference between a hiding place and a secret. Eliza married a man whose name sounded like rain, and when their first child came into the world with quiet eyes, we named him Asa too, because a name can carry both weight and wing. Suwani died in her sleep with a small smile, one hand curled as if still holding a spoon that stirred the edge between heat and hunger. Sometimes, after work, I walked to the lightning tree. Its wound had darkened to a brown-black seam, a healed anger. I would lay my palm against it. It would lay its cool into me. Trees do not speak, but they remember, and that is conversation enough. In the late hour, the river kept showing me the moon the way a kind friend keeps repeating the good news to a man slow to believe it. The newspaper man printed his version, a neat column that called the deed unthinkable, and the town bought it with its morning biscuits. Yet in the barber shop men lowered their voices. Clean, they said. Quiet, they said. Done like a thought that never stumbled. The barber touched his own razor differently after that. It sat in his hand with an attention it had never asked for. In the church, the preacher spoke of righteousness rolling down like waters. Some heard of variety. At the trading post, women weighed cloth and stories. At the river bend, boys dared each other to an old game. Stand perfectly still and see how long the water forgets you exist. The master's name softened on people's tongues. Death blunts authority. Boone left in a stew of rumour and liquor, and folks said he went west to find a place where a whip could still pretend to be a law. Perhaps he found it. Perhaps the law found him. In Florida, a new kind of quiet learned to stand tall. As for me, I did not run. To flee is to let a man name your miles. I stayed and let the fields learn my footsteps, same as before. The ledger in my chest closed not with triumph, but with the click a lock makes when it simply fits. No music, no cheer, a simple, honest sound. Still, at night, the quarters tell it differently. They say a razor walked on 2 legs through the house, light as a moth, and tasted the master's breath the way a child tastes honey with one careful finger. They say the mirror tried to warn him, and his pride mistook warning for flattery. They say the river's spirit, which knows every edge in the county, loaned its silver to a blade for a single minute, and took it back without a drop lost. They say a man named Asa learned the language of steel and spoke it once, perfectly, and put it down. They do not say the rest, because a legend is a coat you hang on a nail. You do not need the nail's story to admire the coat. So the quarters wear the legend and find it sits well on the shoulders. It keeps rain off some nights. Other nights it warms the chest. I dream sometimes not in pictures but in textures. Linen pulled taut, soap that refuses to lie, leather that learns to soften under a thumb. The skin of water when a finger tests it and the river refuses to answer until you have earned its quiet. In the dream the razor is not a weapon, it is a line drawn between the world that was and the world that ought to be. I wake with my mouth tasting iron and my hands open, not empty. When the old ones die, we wash their hands carefully and tie their jaws so their last word cannot run away. We put a coin for the ferryman if the preacher isn't looking, because a man needs many beliefs to cross a river properly. We tell the children that life is a ledger and ask them to keep it honest. A tally of dues paid and dignity kept, of songs hummed because singing would be too loud, of silences chosen instead of silences forced. On certain nights, the kind where the moon is a thin blade and the cypress wears fog like a shawl, I swear I hear metal hum beneath the frog song. Not a threat, not a warning, a simple statement of being. I am edge. I am judgment when judgment must be small to survive. I am not thunder, I am not fire. I am the last thing a lie feels when it is divided from the part that still wants to live. In the morning, the cotton shines like frost no northerner would recognize. The bell speaks its old grammar, and the feet answer because bodies must. Yet each step is a syllable in a new sentence, one the house cannot read. The mirror holds faces as before, but it holds them differently, as if it knows glass remembers the hands that have cleaned it just as clearly as the faces that have used it. The river does what rivers do. Carries, keeps, forgets, returns. Children point to the bend where the moon gets drunk. Women wash history in it and wring it out with arms like pillars. The water sighs thank you. Men stand at its edge and measure a thing with their eyes that they do not name, and across, forever, somewhere not far and not near, a boat without oars waits for a man who has put down his fear and must cross with only his quiet to guide him. The ledger. It remains unfinished by design. A book with no last page is safer. It leaves room for a promise not yet spoken, and a justice that sometimes chooses a small, bright instrument over a loud, dull one. The quarters say, do not shut a book that keeps us alive. Leave it open on the table of the heart, where a breeze can turn a page if it has to. Where a hand or two case, steady now, because sorrow has been taught to behave, can write a single word, then, not thunder, not fire, a line. and at the end of that line, a silence so complete even the mirror nods and agrees.